Welcome everybody to the Captain's Spot. I'm your host Justin Freeman, 6'1", 275 pounds of fantasy knowledge. It's Turkey Day, boys and girls. And we've got two scoops, a second serving, if you will, of the Captain's Spot right here for you today. Two shows for the price of one, wrapped up in one nice, neat, tidy little package for you. We'll be talking Houston Texans and Detroit Lions here to get started. And if you want to fast forward about halfway through, we'll be talking about Washington at Dallas for the afternoon game. Unfortunately, the fantasy gods have taken a game away from us. We will not get Ravens Steelers here on Thanksgiving, but that's okay. We'll make enough money here in these first two games, to just take it easy for the evening. Maybe even speak to our family members for a change. What a surprise. But let's talk about this early game where it, of course, is Texans at Lions, a game with a 50.5 point total. Texans favored on the road by 3 points, favored by a field goal. Let's look at the injury report, where we will get Kenny Golladay and Danny Amendola out once again. They were out last week. They'll be out again this week. Obviously, the sort of steam fell out of the engine for Detroit last week against Carolina. Got shut out there against the Panthers. Just kind of unbelievable. Obviously, played without Golladay, played without Amendola. Also played without rookie running back DeAndre Swift, who's questionable here this week with a concussion. Swift suffered a concussion midweek, sort of in practice, presumably last week, missed, and had just come off his sort of best game of the season where they featured him as both the starting running back and sort of the feature back in that offense. And that's sort of what I think we can project moving forward for Swift. As we get into our simulations today, you'll notice I have Swift presumed out for this game. He seems to truly be a game time decision at this point, so adjust accordingly. It's a lot easier to plan for him being out and then toss him in. Like, we know how we want to build our DeAndre Swift lineups, so we'll assume he's out and play it by ear according to that. But Marvin Hall, TJ Hawkinson, Matthew Stafford were all listed on the injury report. They're fine. They will play, but a true game time decision there on DeAndre Swift. On the Texans side of the football, Cullen Gillaspia, who is the fullback, who is not fantasy relevant, but he is out. That could possibly portend how they want to actually attack the game. Obviously, Duke Johnson will be the feature back once again with David Johnson still on IR. Another player added to IR this week is Randall Cobb. He obviously will be missing for that reason. Kenny Stills out this week. We will not have Kenny Stills or Randall Cobb, so we'll have Will Fuller, we'll have Brandon Cooks, and then sort of a lot of question marks after that. We'll talk our way through that particular process. Josh McCown, backup quarterback, out, not super fantasy relevant. But overall, this looks like an interesting game with a spread of a field goal. This looks like it could really go either way. And Detroit coming off a bit of a letdown game. Now, I think obviously if they get DeAndre Swift back in this game, he will be a featured part of this offense. But if they don't, let's look at how Kerryon Johnson and Adrian Peterson were used last week. Because if Swift is back, it kind of kills the value of Peterson and Johnson. Unless you're really just using them for contrarian reasons, they're sort of overpriced for what their role would be with Swift in. Peterson costs you $5,000, Kerryon Johnson $4,800. And Kerryon played 70% of the team snaps last week compared to 30% for Adrian Peterson. But I think that makes sense when you think about it. That game script got sideways quickly and stayed that way all game long. The Lions were never competitive in that game. And in a game where the Lions are trailing, it's certainly going to set up well for Kerryon Johnson. Peterson going to get completely scripted out of that type of situation. Just not a lot of rush attempts to go around in general, but they went 24% Stafford, 41 to Peterson, and 35 to Johnson last week. I think Peterson's going to continue to be sort of expected to lead the team in carries, but overall, Kerryon Johnson has been such a phenomenally better player than Adrian Peterson really for the last 5 years or so. But overall, I think you can consider Kerryon a tremendously more efficient player at this point than Adrian Peterson. So just keep that in mind. I think they're both irrelevant so long as Swift is in, but if Swift is out, I do think it's Kerryon Johnson who carries the upside in this offense. The Houston Texans rush defense leaves something to be desired, so there is an opportunity for Adrian Peterson to sort of get going on the ground, but honestly, he's been so inefficient, and the Lions run game has not been particularly impressive either. So overall, I'm very interested in Swift if he plays. It's very good projectable volume at this point. I'm not as interested in the other guys if Swift is playing. If Swift is out, probably more interested in Kerryon than I am Adrian Peterson. Let's talk about the pass catchers in this game. We can obviously expect a lot from TJ Hockenson and Marvin Jones, sort of the two core staples now that Danny Amendola and Kenny Golladay are declared out. But what can we expect beyond that? Looks like we could probably expect a little bit of Quintez Cephas, who played 30% of the team snaps last week. A lot of people probably presumed Quintez Cephas might bump into a starting role. He did not. It was actually Marvin Hall who bumped into the starting role, played 68% of the team snaps. That, went with 89% there from Marvin Jones. So overall, I think we can project more volume moving forward for Marvin Hall. Mohamed Sanu, another guy who was signed up to the active roster here on Wednesday. So Sanu cost you $200 this week. Certainly in play. Played last week and got 27% of the team snaps, but no targets. Caught up once again. Yeah, I think he's viable at a price of $200. But Jamal Agnew is a guy who's really got my curiosity piqued. He played 50% of the team snaps last week and saw 19% of the targets. That tied with Marvin Jones. That was only behind TJ Hawkinson's 22%. So overall, that's what we like to see. He's out there running on 54% of the team's routes. I could see, if the team sort of wants to feature Marvin Jones on one side, Marvin Hall, double Marvins, you don't get that very often in pass catching groups, double Marvin formation, but also with Jamal Agnew going in there as the third wide receiver, cost you $800 for him. Not as interested in Mohamed Sanu and Quintez Cephas as they're playing fewer snaps. We want to follow the snaps, especially when there's that much ambiguity around each of those teams. So we're talking about Houston. Man, there couldn't be a more clear slam dunk play on the slate than Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, 13-2, a guy that we just had to get in there. He's the only alpha on this entire slate as far as guys that you have to get into the lineup. It's hard for me to imagine a way where Watson fails to deliver on this slate. 13-2, I think he should be nearly 100% owned. Just a tremendous floor-ceiling combination. Has everything you're looking for and has really started to rush a lot over his last 4 games. 32, 36, 36, 32% of team rush attempts. Love to see that. Love it. That's phenomenal rushing usage for a quarterback. That's pretty good rushing usage for some running backs. So obviously love to see it from the quarterback. Has 2 pretty strong pass catchers there, Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller, but figuring out behind those 2 guys, what do we do next? Now, obviously, I should point out, DeAndre Carter, you probably know that name. He was released last week. He will not be in this game. Stephen Mitchell was promoted today to the active roster, where he will join not only Cooks and not only Fuller, but also Kiki Cutie. He'll be up there with those guys as well as a guy named Isaiah Coulter. So we want to keep our eye out for Isaiah Coulter. He was a 5th-round rookie from Rhode Island. And sometimes what happens with these rookies that are sort of later round draft picks, they miss a couple games to start the season with an injury, and then they're sort of kind of staying on the active roster but declared inactive on game day. You see these type of guys happen a lot, and Coulter's been one of these guys where you're like, I don't know if he's still really battling this injury where he started the season with, or if he's actually truly like a healthy scratch. And he's probably more like been a healthy scratch over the last several weeks. But this week, I'm predicting he should be active. At least one would assume so, with a lack of Randall Cobb and a lack of Kenny Stills. So I think what's going to happen is Coulter will be active. We'll get some Stephen Mitchell. I don't believe Stephen Mitchell is even in the player pool. So you don't have to worry about him. So if you're going to focus on like the super low-owned guy, it's going to be Coulter, but also Kiki Cutie. So Cutie is going to be the like locked and loaded number 3 option there. It's going to go, Fuller and Cooks have been sort of right neck and neck with each other all season long. It'll continue to stay that way. But behind them, it'll obviously be Cutie, and then probably another decent-sized teardrop before you get to Isaiah Coulter. But I do think you can probably sneak up on some people. Like obviously Van Jefferson was a guy who, on the Monday night slate paid off for people with a single catch near the end zone. It worked out. Coulter could be the same type of guy. We don't really know what that usage is going to look like. He may not play a snap, But if you can get a guy who's going to be like sub 2% owned into your lineup, good things can happen for you that way, and it's easy to get unique. At the tight end position, there is a little bit of a changing of the guard there. Jordan Akins took over 51% of the team snaps last week, followed by 44% from Pharaoh Brown, not Darren Fells. Darren Fells, 34% of the team snaps last week. So it seems like the team's trying to get Pharaoh Brown, who'll cost you $400, a bit more involved. Akins, $5,600. It's pretty expensive, but it could be a guy whose role increases a little bit without Stills and without Randall Cobb in this lineup. Sometimes the tight ends can take on a bit more prominent role when that sort of thing happens. We look at Duke Johnson, $7,800. He's clearly, the featured point of this run game. I guess maybe I can't even say that because Deshaun Watson is probably the featured runner in this offense. But CJ Prosise has come in and gotten a few carries. We haven't seen anyone else be involved in the run game other than Prosise with Duke Johnson there in David Johnson's absence. So overall, I think you could predict good usage there for Duke Johnson, but the efficiency's really been lacking, and maybe he can make up for it against Detroit. These are both teams that should be able to run the football against one another. But overall, I think it is going to favor Watson a little bit more than Duke Johnson. We just haven't seen any level of spark. So why don't we take a look at our distributions this week? And at the captain spot, it's clearly Deshaun Watson, followed by Marvin Jones, Matthew Stafford, Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, Duke Johnson. And obviously, keep in mind, this is without DeAndre Swift. And I imagine if DeAndre Swift is playing in this game, he's the number 2 option, ranking ahead of Marvin Jones just behind Deshaun Watson. He's getting consistent, predictable usage on the ground and in the air, and that's what we like to see. Now, Watson is, I'm always a little bit taken aback when there's a quarterback as the leading option at captain. But Deshaun's been such a big runner over the last 4 weeks. I have a lot of confidence that he could pay off, not only in the air, and every time he does that, he's paying off one of his pass catchers, but do it on the ground as well. So anytime we're seeing running backs who can produce yardage and touchdowns on the ground, they are going to stand out as excellent captain choices for us. Now let's take a look at the flex, where of course we get the 2 quarterbacks tossed in there, Watson and Stafford, followed by Duke Johnson. And, that's going to be a big benefit there from Johnson's predictable usage and his price point being $7,800. That's affordable, especially on this slate where we've got a lot of cheap options, that are pretty far down the depth chart at receiver where we can choose from. Followed by, and then it's somewhere around there, I would imagine maybe just behind Matthew Stafford is where DeAndre Swift would rank if I had him active in this set of projections. Brandon Cooks, Kerryon Johnson, Will Fuller, Marvin Jones. So don't discount the ceiling there for Kerryon Johnson because things can go really well for him in this type of game, in this type of contest. Marvin Hall's sort of our favorite cheap option there on the Detroit side, followed by TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Akins, Quintez Cephas, Jamal Agnew, Matt Prater. So overall, that tells you what you need to know about how to address this particular slate. It looks like a fun one, but why don't we hop on over and talk about Dallas at Washington now? This Dallas-Washington game's got a total of 46, so it's down quite a bit from the Detroit game, but Washington is a road dog, 3-point dogs on the road to Dallas. I think that number is wrong. Now, I'm a Washington football fan, bless my heart, but I think that number's wrong. I don't get why the Washington football team would be 3-point dogs against this Cowboys team after the way we've seen them play against each other. So I don't have a lot of confidence in the Cowboys' ability to move the football offensively against Washington, especially in the passing game. Washington's pass defense is actually legit. They're good. They've got a tremendous defensive line that gets pressure. The cornerbacks hold up in coverage. And it could give Andy Dalton fits. So I don't know that this is going to be a great game for the Cowboys passing attack. Obviously, people are encouraged by what they saw in that Cowboys-Vikings game last week. That was a great game for the Cowboys. Got back on track, got Ezekiel Elliott a 100-yard game under his belt again for the first time in a long time since Dak went down. So, people want the Cowboys to be back, and it may happen. But overall, I think the most likely thing is that Andy Dalton gets held in check this week against Washington. I think this has the potential to be like a really low-scoring, boring type of game. I think that's the way Washington would prefer it go. We've also seen games where Alex Smith is dropping back 50-plus times. So there's a wide range of outcomes for this, and I would encourage you to consider that when you're making your lineups. Like this game could be Dallas blowout, Washington blowout, low scoring, high scoring. There's a lot of ways that this can go. Try to make lineups that can cover all of your bases. You can never get all of them, but perhaps you can get pretty close. Andy Dalton will cost you $9,600. To me, that's not a priority item, not against this Washington defense, and not with the up and down nature that we've seen from Andy Dalton. I think Dalton will come in a little bit over-owned. Now, Zeke at 10-6 is a little bit different story because I think we've got very projectable volume there for Zeke. I was worried after Dak went down that the team would scale back his usage, especially once it became clear this was going to be a lost season for Dallas, although I guess you could say they're in the hunt for the NFC East. But at 10-6, I'm willing to eat that price for Zeke Elliott. There's just only so many options, and there's only so many people I want to spend up for on this particular game. Now, so that running game is going to go exclusively through Zeke. I mean, Tony Pollard's got some involvement, but not enough to be sustainable. I mean, you hope that, like last week, he was able to break off a long run for a touchdown in one of the handful of snaps he got. You can't really bank on that week after week. That's, we tend to try to chase volume, but, Showdown is a 1 week sample size, and it doesn't get any more of a correlation exercise than that. So, you got to consider some of these weird things. You got to consider in the other slate, Kerryon Johnson might, have a 40-yard pass. I mean, some of these things where you're like, even if you don't think the player is all that good or the situation is all that great, I mean, one play changes the dynamics of the entire slate, obviously. As we're looking at the pass catchers there for Dallas, obviously, if I'm not as interested in Dalton, I'm not as interested in Amari Cooper, I'm not as interested in Gallup, not as interested in Lamb. The fact that they're all there kind of really sucks away the target potential for any one of those guys. We've actually seen an increase in targets over the last month to Dalton Schultz, the tight end. And, Dalton Schultz has been super heavily involved. He'll cost you $6,200 this week. If we look back at, say, the last 4 weeks for Dalton Schultz, 19, 21, 19, and 19% of teams' targets. That's pretty doggone consistent, and that's come with a variety of backup quarterbacks. I think we can continue to see elevated target market share for Dalton Schultz. The narrative all the time is the tight end being the safety blanket for a quarterback. I think that can certainly be the case for Dalton Schultz. The price points of of Cooper and Lamb, maybe a little too much to swallow. $8,000 for Amari Cooper, $9,200 for Lamb, but $3,400 for Michael Gallup certainly in play. He hasn't been tremendously efficient this year, but he is out there all the time. He is out there on the field more than Cooper, more than Lamb. And the guys who are out there are going to have games where they spike. And Gallup being priced at $3,400 lets you make a lot of things work. Matter of fact, Gallup in the captain spot is not a bad idea. I mean, think about, you can play everybody else on the slate you want to with Gallup in the captain spot, and he carries upside. Now, on the Washington side, Alex Smith cost you $9,800. I mean, I'm not in love with it, but it's fine. We can play Alex Smith against the Cowboys defense. Antonio Gibson, 10-2. I'm interested in Gibson. I'm interested in Gibson and Zeke. I think both these run games are going to be preferred options for each of these teams. Now, J.D. McKissick at 7,000. That's where it gets a little bit interesting. McKissick's been getting peppered with targets, averaging 18% of targets on the year. I mean, that's a tremendous number. It kind of reminds me very similar to James White's role last year for the Patriots offense. I mean, just peppered with targets, approaching 20%, but just not very involved in the run game. But it maybe doesn't have to be. If he's going to get you 5 catches, there's 5 fantasy points right there. And maybe if it's for 40 yards, you got another 4. We're up to 9 already. And if he can get you 20 yards rushing, you're at 11. And he hasn't even scored a touchdown. If he gets you a touchdown, it's a gravy. So that's a pretty good little floor built in there for a guy like J.D. McKissic. Now, Peyton Barber, on the other hand, $800. To me, not worth playing. He could obviously pay off with a goal line touchdown, but we've seen Antonio Gibson more heavily used in those areas on the field. If we look at the passing game, obviously everything's going to start and end with Terry McLaurin, but he's $11,000. You got to figure out whether that makes sense with the build that you want to do, especially in a game we think could be a little bit sloppy. But there's no better bet for target volume than Terry McLaurin in this game. Logan Thomas, $5,400. He is in play, just has not been a very efficient player so far this year. A target to Logan Thomas has not been a very profitable thing. Now, Dontrell Inman should be back in this game. He'll cost you $1,400, and I think he should slide back in as the number 2 opposite of Terry McLaurin. It may take a week, but if the Washington football team can get back into the rhythm they had earlier this year, Inman starting opposite of Terry McLaurin in this offense. So at $1,400, that's a pretty attractive price point for Dontrell Inman. The team has been using a variety, sort of a committee approach behind those guys. Matter of fact, Cam Sims was the guy last week. Matter of fact, over the last several weeks, has averaged over 80% of the team's snaps over the last 3 weeks. He's been the guy. They've used a little bit of Steven Sims, a little bit of Isaiah Wright, but mostly Cam Sims. So I think Cam Sims gets dinged a little bit here, even though he doesn't have the targets to show for it. 10%, 10%, 8%, nothing super attractive there. I think Inman leapfrogs past Cam Sims, but don't sell Cam Sims too short too quickly. Other than Isaiah Wright, Steven Sims Jr., I don't think we're super interested in anybody else really on this roster. Robert Foster played 8% of the team snaps last week. I don't think he really matters, especially we get Dontrell Inman back. So overall, no need to go too much cheaper than Dontrell Inman. I think that's a fantastic play there at $1,400. Let's go over to our captain assignments here for this game, where it's Terry McLaurin leading the way in this game. So we're not super high on this passing attack, but we're aware of the fact that when all the targets go to one person, it's really easy for them to go off and lead the entire slate in scoring. And that's kind of what we would expect there in a Terry McLaurin captain lineup. And keep in mind here, this is a 10,000 simulation run. And you can see that a Terry McLaurin captain lineup is significantly short of 20%. Looks like it's probably somewhere in the 17-18% range. So, recommending Terry McLaurin as the captain, there's still, 83% of the likely outcomes do not include Terry McLaurin captain. So think about how you would build each of those types of lineups, a Terry McLaurin lineup versus a non-Terry McLaurin lineup. What does an Antonio Gibson captain lineup look like? Does it include Terry McLaurin in it? Would those two guys not be included in the same lineup together? After that, we're looking at Andy Dalton, followed by Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, and Alex Smith. Now, you heard me talk about why I don't like Andy Dalton and why I kind of like Alex Smith. So it may seem a little strange that Andy Dalton would outrank Alex Smith at captain. But let's think about this. Why does this make sense? How many pass catchers does Alex Smith realistically have to throw the ball to? Mostly just one, Terry McLaurin. So if Alex Smith has a really good day, guess who else is going to have a really good day? If Alex Smith has a good day capable of being the captain, guess who else had a really good day capable of being captain? Terry McLaurin did. It's going to be very rare that Alex Smith just pays off at captain level prices and does not also pay off Terry McLaurin. Andy Dalton, on the other hand, can easily pay off captain while distributing the ball to the variety of guys at his disposal. A little bit to Gallup, a little bit to Lamb, a little bit to Cooper, a little bit to Schultz, a little bit to Zeke. And now all of a sudden, none of those guys has the cumulative score needed to pass Andy Dalton. Hope that makes sense. Hope I articulated that okay. But following those guys, following Andy Dalton is Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, Alex Smith. Little teardrop there to CeeDee Lamb, followed by Michael Gallup. We talked about him and the captain there making a little bit of sense. And then Logan Thomas, J.D. McKissic, Dalton Schultz. Let's look at the flex where we have Andy Dalton and Alex Smith both right there together, both the quarterbacks at the top per usual. Antonio Gibson and Ezekiel Elliott, both the running backs right there at the top per usual. Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, both the number 1 receivers right there. And this is all making sense. Followed by Dontrell Inman. So there's our first cheap guy. J.D. McKissick, another cheaper, but not quite as cheap as Inman type of guy. And then Michael Gallup, Logan Thomas, C.D. Lamb, and then our kickers get involved. I should point out that there are some injury news and notes here on the Washington side. Dustin Hopkins, the kicker for Washington, is questionable and has a really, really discouraging practice report so far this week. Did not practice this week at all. Greg Zuerlein's questionable for Dallas. He looks fine based on the practice report. Terry McLaurin questionable as well. He looks fine per the practice report. Everybody else mostly healthy. So Dustin Hopkins is the one guy who I want to make sure is actually in the lineup before we start playing him. But overall, guys, this looks like a really, really fun Thanksgiving Showdown slate series. And I got a good feeling we're going to walk away with a little bit of cash after this one. Hope you guys have a very, very blessed day with your families. Eat a lot of turkey, do the whole thing, man, and spend the rest of the afternoon after that 4 o'clock game actually getting to know one another for a change. That'll do it for this week. We'll see you on the Sunday night show here on the Captain Spot YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys soon.